Poet can read popular science, take from it whatever he or she wants and express something poetically. And I'm not about to criticise that or say that's not valid, because the point is it's not pretending to be science. It's not pretending to clarify, it's just using something as source material.
It does feel like there's something promising here, but what do you feel about it? Because we're just carrying on.
Yeah, sure. No, well, I like the peanut, and I maybe that's much less interesting, but I just need to sketch it. Just do it the way that I would have done it if I'd been given this task. I would have assumed that it maybe that just instead, but I would have put a camera in front of each one,
Right.
and then that would have gone to 3. But then that would have given us 6.
Movable. These camera monitor complexes are movable, so this can be removed or placed there to make the point about the looping. But also these can be moved next to each other. So you take this round here, and you place both cameras on that, and then you have 2 peanuts and 3 peanuts, total of 5 peanuts. Right. You take this and you move it behind it, and you could set the whole thing up in a way where it wasn't at all obvious that it was intended. But there's some sort of clever mechanism whereby it's like, oh, well, what happens if we put that behind that? Right. And then you start to get
Like your turntable.
whereas originally, so addition is fine. We've got this complex represents 2-ness, and this complex represents 3-ness. And we can say, well, what happens when we put them next to each other? What happens when we apply them to different objects? Yeah. And now, what happens when we apply one to the other? And you could even roll one round. So you could 3, 2, and you could 2, 3.
What we're doing is we're creating this kind of this basic example of what 2 is, and when you 3 it, or when you 3 2, or 2 or 3. But it's essentially it's 3 and 2. But there is a nice chronology system where there's this linear thing where time is represented kind of in this way that it's sort of dividing, which is sort of more. I kind of like the fact that it has that element to it, that there is a sort of origin and then there's a sort of result, which is this branching system, and that fits in with the whole kind of pistachio nut kind of tree to then the nut to this sort of branching kind of thing, and then come back to and it's kind of I don't know. There's a sort of crossover with that.
There is a sort of subtle, because time, one of the key features in your work, the representation of time, and so you're thinking how that might be brought in. But there is actually, in a very subtle way, time is involved in here, and then time's part of the philosophical problem that this is looking at, in the sense that multiplication involves time in a way that adding doesn't. Hence, that's talk about times tables, and that's because you talk about 3 times 7, 4 times 6, and it's the number of times something is repeated, and in some ways that's just the use of language, but at the same time, in order to discuss 3 5s as 3 times 5, you have to register each 5. And each of those registerings occurs in a separate moment in time. So there has to be a progression of time in order for multiplication to occur in a different way than there is for addition. So there's time lurking inside this, is what I suppose I'm saying.
It would be the idea of this, but then
you just take that tape off, and then instead of the monitors and the monitor and the what we could use is we could also adapt the system. We've got a monitor which is reproducing, it's creating a reproduction of the nut, and it's also creating a double nut on a single monitor. But we could easily just create piles of nuts and just do what like. So you've got this generational part where we've got pig, rabbit, pork, and then you've got within that you've got kind of rabbits existing under the hawk number. The leads, but it's just that it's becoming, they're kind of in different stages, but they're becoming, so I think that obviously you see that 2 is made up of 2 boards, rather than being a unit in itself.
Right.
So I think it's quite, there's a sort of interesting thing that you'll get this close to the singularity appearing.
Okay. So if we were to put a single model pig in front of the camera, then we have a pair of pigs appearing on the first screen.
Yeah, which actually should be rabbits.
Which there's not a name. Then you never get 2 models together, supposedly. Move us away from this idea of animals mutating into other animals. As interesting as that would be, it might be distracting from the actual point being made. I don't know.
Well, I think I suppose this Platonic idea of a number, it's 2, and you're representing that to us, it becomes such a familiar kind of thing for us. We just sort of see it as a symbol for something. But when you take it back and you use the word brace for the number 2, and brace is then a rabbit, but you're finding that your bore is coming through this, it's being teleported electronically onto this screen into the realm of 2, into the sort of virtual world, or the platonic world of 2, but it's actually appeared as a boar when it should be a rabbit. You're not going to, I mean, I'm sorry to say you're not going to arrive at a sculpture.
No,
But you have to build a prototype in order to make something, and make something fluid perfect. You know, it's not going to get beyond the prototype at this stage.
that was all.
It might be the beginning of something really beautiful and elegant, but by tomorrow you're not going to. I mean, I think just using tape and a board and just making it really utilitarian, and just like the science, it's really interesting. The scientific models in the science team, you've got all these beautiful things that were built at 3 in the morning at a Lollipop 6, and like kind of old pipe cleaners and plasticine, where people have like had a eureka moment and they're in a hurry to get an idea across to their colleagues or their friends in the morning. And then later the models get all formalised and made out of injection moulding plastic and all that sort. But they're actually the early ones are the more interesting ones. I mean, there's been quite a lot of kind of obstacles in terms of trying to come up with a way of working together in terms of our different motives. I mean, what me and Matthew share is that we're both, because Matthew's a mathematician who's trying to explain abstract ideas to a general public who don't necessarily know about math, but I'm dealing with abstract ideas. We're both visualizing abstract invisible ideas that are quite complex in a physical or visual form. It's a visualization rather than sort of just the description through the medium itself, and sort of taking it out of its own medium and using it in other ways. But my motives are different from Matthew's.
So hopefully from seeing that you get some sense, however vague, of this strange journey we've been on during this week, which has gone from these initial discussions and mutual information about each other's work towards the... well, what happened really was that when we got to the middle of the week, I think we discovered that we weren't happy with this question of how do artists and artworks dramatize abstract concepts, because we weren't sure whether they did or whether they should. But in the end, we ended up hypothesizing, if artists were to do such a thing, how would it work? And so there was this interesting creative process. Before we explain what all that was about and explore a bit further the themes that have emerged, and talk about this interesting kind of interplay between the residents' respective projects and this there's a kind of tentative groping towards a process that would involve both parties. And I think it has to be said with a great deal of goodwill on both sides. Before we talk about that too much, I'd like to turn to the residents to kind of explain their respective work. And firstly, Matthew, since I spoke to you in Collapse 1, you have been working on the trilogy of which this first volume is about to appear, and from which this project took its title, Secrets of Creation. The first volume is called The Mystery of Prime Numbers, and what is very impressive to me about this book is that not only is it a true attempt to try to explain some very complex mathematical concepts to a general audience without requiring any mathematical background, but it also contains some very speculative and provocative hypotheses about what these ideas mean. So, if you don't mind, could you explain to us as well as you can in the limited time we have what the project is all about?